Now it's time for Call You and Yours with Winifred Robinson.
Hello, welcome to the programme. Today we're talking about one of the biggest scandals in the housing market, new style leaseholds. If you're caught up in it all, call us now, ring 03700 100 444. New houses never used to be sold leasehold, where you owned the house but somebody else owns the land and charges you rent on it. It was a thing you found with old houses, where they were always peppercorn rents. But from around 2000, developers in England started offering new houses leasehold. Most of them were starter homes in the north. Buyers only realised much later on that their homes were impossible to sell because of what was in the leases. Some have hefty ground rents that can double every 10 years, big charges for maintenance of estates, huge charges for permission to make any alterations, or even to own a pet. It's one of the biggest consumer scandals today. If you've been caught up in it, give us a call. Ring us now, 03700 100 444. We're going to devote the next 40 or so minutes to hearing your stories. We can go now to a woman whose story started it all. Katie Kendrick is in our Merseyside studio. Katie, what kind of a house did you buy?
Well, I bought a 4-bedroom detached house up in the northwest in 2014 from a developer, Leasehold.
Did anyone explain to you at the outset what the terms of your lease might mean for you in the longer term?
No, they didn't. They just simply said it was leasehold and it was normal standard practice for new builds to be leasehold, and that I could purchase the freehold after 2 years for a couple of £1,000. So I wasn't really alarmed to the long-term implications.
And what has it meant to you as time's unfolded?
Well, to be honest, I absolutely had no idea what web I was about to get tangled up into until I received a letter just before the 2-year point to say that my freehold had been sold on, and I was not aware of what the implication of that actually was until a neighbour alarmed me to the fact that the permission fees upon the onward sale of the freehold had in fact gone up. Permission to put a small conservatory onto the property went from £300 up to £2,600.
Wow.
Which I thought that cannot possibly be right, which is why I was alarmed and kind of looked into things a little bit more and realised that was nothing compared to the abuses that were much deeply more embedded within this whole scandal, which we've now unfolded.
Now, Case, you said that when you bought the house, you were told you'd be able to buy the freehold within a couple of years for a couple of £1,000, so you weren't worried. Once you didn't do that, so once the freehold was then sold on by the developers, what would the charges be now for you to buy your own freehold?
So then I inquired to my new freeholder, which I had to pay a fee to ask a question.
Just to ask, you had to pay?
Yeah, £108. The management agent that collect the ground rent don't have a contact number. They are uncontactable via telephone, so everything is through an email inquiry, and there's a fee of £108 administration fee.
Every time you email them?
To ask them a specific question about your lease. So I contacted them and asked for how much it would be to buy my freehold, to which they came back and said it would be just over £13,000.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot worse leases than what mine is out there, and some people on my estate have been receiving freehold valuations of £33,000 to £44,000. It's just a random figure that they pluck out of the sky. I asked them for a breakdown of how they formulated that figure, to which they couldn't provide me with one. They said that they're not at liberty to discuss it, but that's how much the freeholder would like. They said I could come back with a counter offer, so I offered them £5,000, which I thought was overly generous considering they told me between £2,000 and £4,000 at the initial point of sale. So they come back and said no, it's £7,600. But again, it's not the actual price of the freehold. All the same, fee paying permission fees remain
even if
the transfer.
You bought it. So even if you pay the £7,600, you'll be paying forever these fees.
Yes, permission fees which stay within the transfer deed. Yeah.
And it means you can't sell your house on, is that right?
It makes it increasingly difficult to sell a house on. My personal lease is not as onerous as a lot of them. It is below the 0.1%
because if the ground rent is charged at more than 0.1% of the value of your home, lots of mortgage companies won't lend on it.
Absolutely, and this is where people are becoming stuck, where they realise they're having their penny drop moment when they realise that they want to sell, and they realise that the leasehold issues are actually affecting them because people purchasing those properties are struggling to get mortgages on ground rents which are worth more than 0.1% value of your property, or the ground rents that double every 10 years are totally almost impossible to sell at the minute.
Well, Katie, stay with us. We're going to hear from some callers now, people who've rung us on 03700 100 444, 03700 100 444. Angela Capper is in Penistone in South Yorkshire. Angela, are you caught up then in this leasehold scandal?
I am, yes. I could echo everything that Kate has just said. Buying a property and being told lies about the leasehold being there for just 2 years, and you can purchase the freehold in 2 years' time, but in 2 years, when my time to purchase my freehold comes, that it could have been sold on.
How do the terms of the lease affect you now?
At the moment, I am unable to do any alterations to the property. I'm unable to change the look of the property, for example, changing the colour of my front door. Would have to...
Sorry, go on. You would have to...
I'd have to contact the developer and ask permission, and I'd have to pay a £90 fee to be able to change the colour of my front door.
And the business of buying your freehold, are you within that 2 years where you can buy the freehold at a reasonable price or not?
I've just at Christmas I will be at my 2 years term to be able to ask to purchase my freehold.
You're not even allowed to. You're not even allowed to ask for 2 years.
No, that's law, that you're not allowed to be able to purchase the freehold for 2 whole years. I did ask at the time of purchasing the property if I could buy it now, and we were told that no new houses were sold freehold.
And has your freehold been sold on by the developer? Do you know that?
I'm not aware of if it's been sold on as yet, but I'm not unable to ask as well at the moment, as I'm not at that point.
Now, should you be able to buy the freehold at a price you can afford, and you say you can't even ask that and you don't know that, would owning the freehold free you from all the kind of clauses that Katie describes and that you have described, having to pay even to change the colour of your own front door?
No, the permission covenants are still there. For me to purchase the freehold, I would have to go to a solicitor and ask them to go to the developer to request the freehold for the property, and then there will be lots of discussions on whether I can get these permission fees lifted. But in lots of cases, it's becoming impossible to do, and I just feel like it's scandalous that I should have to pay somebody for permission to change something about the house in which I thought I owned.
Angela, thanks very much for getting in touch about that. Now, you're listening to Call You and Yours. It's our weekly phone-in here at BBC Radio 4, and we're hearing today from people who are caught up in the leasehold scandal, the sale of new properties with pretty onerous leasehold terms. Katie Kendrick is one of our expert guests today. She is the woman who first drew attention to what's been happening with leaseholds, and she set up the National Leasehold Campaign in 2017. Katie, those callers then, are they typical of the stories that you are hearing?
They are really typical. I mean, what she's described there is very common. People can ask their developers to purchase a freehold before they get to the 2 year point, but that is called an informal offer. Everybody has a legal right to purchase their freehold after living in the property for 2 years. So I think that's where the 2 year point come in. There's nothing stopping the developers from selling the freehold to them sooner than the 2 years, but it's everybody's legal right to purchase after they have lived there for 2 years.
Well, let's bring another caller in. Christine is in East Cheshire. Christine, are you caught up in the leasehold scandal?
Yes, I am indeed. We're in a very similar position to everybody else. We bought our new house as leasehold in February 2016. We weren't aware at the time that there was a possibility of buying it as freehold. Neither our solicitor nor the developer told us that. Having realised we'd made a mistake, we thought, well, we've only got to wait 2 years and then we can buy our freehold, which we fully intended to do. But we'd been resident in the house for 1 year when we got a nice little letter off the developer saying that 2 weeks previously they had transferred the freehold on to a third party.
So they had sold it on?
Yes.
Without you ever having a chance to buy it, because
yes,
nobody
and
mentioned to you.
I understand if you live in a flat or an apartment, if your landlord intends to sell your freehold on, by law they're obliged to give you warning so you have an opportunity to buy it for yourself. People in houses don't have that cover.
Christine, buying a house, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford to do it, it is the biggest, most important purchase of your life for most of us, isn't it?
Yes, it's a huge investment, and I felt physically sick when we got that letter off the developer, because I felt that the chances of us buying our freehold for a reasonable cost had suddenly escalated, and I felt like we'd made an even worse mistake than ever. And I did some investigation on the Company House website and found that 3 of the directors of the developer were sitting on the board of the company to which they sold the freehold in the run-up to that sale. I don't know what their relationship is. I'm sure it's perfectly legal, but it just sounded a little bit odd to me.
And can I ask you, have you tried to find out how much it would cost you to buy the freehold from these new people who own it? Although, as you say, they're associated with the development company.
Yeah. I've approached a reputable law firm that specialises in leasehold problems and matters, and they've given me a quote that ranges from just over 7,670 to 9,510. They can't be absolutely accurate about the cost, because in England there is a formula that covers what it should cost you to buy your freehold, but there's elements in that formula that are negotiable, and they can make thousands and thousands of pounds worth of difference. Now, if I lived in Scotland or Ireland, there's a flat rate. You just pay 9 times your ground rent. And as my ground rent is £350 a year, that's quite an acceptable figure, 3,150. But as I say, if I go ahead and put in a formal application to buy my freehold off this third party that's now in possession of it, the law firm can't be entirely clear on how much it would cost.
Christine, just stay there, because I want to go back to Katie, who has built up a lot of expertise on this now. Mm-hmm. Now, Katie, when you started out, you had no idea how many people were in the same situation as you. They bought these new homes with these leases that were ticking time bombs, that were going to cause them big problems in the future, perhaps be impossible even to sell on, but they had no idea. Now, since then, you believe you've been able to find out how many people are in the situation that Christine finds herself in and you find yourself in. How many is it?
Well, in the National Leasehold campaign, we've got 14,000, which is a really great number. But the developers seem to be downplaying the numbers in terms of how many that this actually affects. There is, I think the government last figure was 4.2 million leaseholders in this country.
But they won't all have these problem leases, will they?
No. I think that there's been a figure bounded around of about 100,000 people with onerous leases, but then it's not clear whether what element of that are the worst case ones, which are the doubling ground rents every 10 years, or which are the ones which I think would affect a lot of leaseholders out there with ground rents that are more than 0.1% value of the property. So onerous is not just about these doubling ground rents that you hear in the press. There's a lot more onerous terms out there than they're willing to expose. I mean,
what advice would you give Christine? Sorry to interrupt.
Well, no, it's okay. So she is right. The houses do not have the right of first refusal. Flats do. However, there is massive loopholes in the legislation that allows even flats to not have that right of first refusal. There is still a ways around it. The law is broken, as agreed by the Law Commission. Nicholas Hopkins has said the law around leasehold is broken and it does need fixing. In terms of what for Christine to do moving forward, to purchase her freehold now, she's been quoted between 7,000 and 9,000. But again, on top of that, that she's responsible for the freeholders' legal fees and surveyors' fees as well.
So you'd say sit tight, wait for the law to change?
Well, it's a difficult decision, and I've just had to make this exact same decision to purchase my freehold. Or do I wait for legislation to change? People keep coming to me asking me what should they do. It's a very personal decision depending on your circumstances. If you want to try and sell your house, it may be a priority to purchase the freehold now, because if you need to move house for whatever reason, the leasehold issue may well be a problem for you.
Christine, what do you think you'll do?
Well, I know the Law Commission has come out with a very encouraging report on all sorts of ways that the leasehold system in this country should be reformed, but it is advisory, and then we have to wait for Parliament to consider it and decide whether they want to do anything about it. So we could sit tight, but we're getting on in life. Neither of us are spring chickens, and I don't want to pass this can of worms on to our heirs either.
Big problem. Christine, thanks so much for calling. And Katie, thanks for now. Are you caught up in the leasehold scandal? That's our question on Call You and Yours today. Tell us your story, please. Ring us now, 03700 100 444. If you tweet, we're hashtag you and yours, or you can text messages to 84844 or email us, youandyours@bbc.co.uk. Samantha Fennick is opening all of the emails today. Read us a good one, Sam.
I've got a good one here. Michael in South Wales thinks that he's been missold because he bought under the government's Help to Buy scheme through a housing association. He owns 70% of the lease and the housing association owns 30% of the lease, and they are the freeholders. Now, Michael's since found out after buying this property that the value of it will diminish once the remaining lease term falls below 80 years, and that lease extension will cost considerably more if requested after it falls below that benchmark. And he thinks that he was missold because he wasn't told this when he bought the place. However, we have had an email from Colin Holland, and he says he thinks it's totally naive that people in the UK buy houses without the freehold. In parts of Eastern Europe, such as Latvia, the state own the land and you only buy the house. Then you can do whatever you want to your house. He thinks that in the UK, if you buy a house without a leasehold, it should be considered to be gross negligence.
Well, let's take a caller who probably agrees with some of that. I'm asking today, you caught up in the leasehold scandal, and you can call us on 03700 100 444. But Matthew Jones thinks it isn't a scandal. He is in Swansea. Why is it not a scandal then if people have bought new homes, been told they could buy their leases at a reasonable price, only to find that they are later sold on to property developers and the price shoots right up?
Well, when people are buying a leasehold property, they should, and well, I think everybody actually gets legal representation when they purchase the property. So the lease should actually be, analysed by the solicitors acting on behalf before you purchase. So
if it's a scandal, if it isn't a scandal, then you're suggesting that really it's poor performance at the very least by solicitors.
Well, I think everybody has personal responsibility when they buy anything, whether it's a property or any goods.
Even if they're first-time buyers and they've hired in professional help?
Well, it's even more... Well, when you say professional help...
Everyone has a solicitor, don't they? No one buys a property. You can't if you're getting a mortgage.
Well, exactly. So you've got two issues here. You have legal representatives who, it might be argued, are not actually feeding back to first-time buyers or any buyer of a leasehold property of the risks attached to that purchase.
Do you think that anybody would buy a property if they were warned that further down the line they might not be able to sell it, that it might not be mortgageable?
Well, I would. I wouldn't buy a leasehold property if I knew the risk attached to it. Everybody's got a choice in life whether they buy a freehold or a leasehold property. So I mean, I personally bought a leasehold property in Swansea, and I have a property backer myself, admittedly, but
you're a property backer, did you say?
No, I'm a property. I have a property background, so I'm a chartered surveyor by trade.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
The leasehold property that you bought, was it brand new?
No, it was a second-hand property. So
built when?
I bought it in 2004.
And that's when it was built, was it?
It was built in 1992. So there was about 12 or 14 years I'd come off the lease. And there was a formula for the first 10 years, which was, I think some of the callers are saying, a multiplier of the ground rent. But that had ceased because I purchased the property after 12 years. And then you have, I think some callers have mentioned the Leasehold Reform Act 1967, which is the legislation that actually discusses the formula to actually come to a purchase price for the actual ground. And obviously you have to be to actual. I mean, you can apply it anytime you like, but you have to qualify for the Leasehold Reform Act formula. You have to be a purchaser of 2 years or more.
Well, Matthew, obviously you can navigate your way through this because you're a property specialist. The reason I called it a scandal is that's what the all-party group of MPs who've got together to try to put this right have called it an outrage, a disgrace, a scandal.
I totally disagree. It's not a scandal. It's transparent. People have a choice to buy a leasehold or freehold property if they have proper advice from a lawyer and or a chartered surveyor, because not a lot of people actually employ chartered surveyors in these purchases. But one of your callers is saying that they had a guide price from their lawyer of how much it may cost. But if they actually involved a chartered surveyor who specialises in Leasehold Reform Act valuations, they can actually act on your behalf to get the best price for you.
OK, hang on, Matthew. Let's bring Katie Kendrick in, who set up the campaign group. It's not a scandal, Katie.
Is it not?
You should have exercised due diligence, or the professionals acting on your behalf should have done.
Yes, do you know, if I had a penny for every time I heard that, I'd be rich right now. Legal representation, correct, we all had legal representation. Many people use the developers' recommended solicitors. They were led that way for whatever incentives that they were given or pressured into doing so. Yes, there is a legal lease that we are supposed to read. Many people read it, some people didn't. If anybody's ever read a lease, it's not written in English. It's not there for the layperson to actually understand and break down what it means.
Matthew?
Yeah, I understand that, but you have a legal representative. Your solicitor should be trying to disseminate the basic structure of that lease to you before you purchase the property.
Absolutely.
Go on, sorry.
And there was one comment made by somebody earlier on, before I stopped driving, that now some of these properties are now not mortgageable and they can't sell them. Mm-hmm. Well, surely that then raises a question about the building societies and banks that are lending money on these leasehold properties.
You are absolutely correct, and that is why
not actually doing a forensic identification of the lease before they value it for mortgage purposes, because they're now lending money on properties that are now not mortgageable. So there are potential feedback, or sort of like, I don't say actions is a strong word, back to my profession and also the solicitors, the lawyers.
Right.
Let's bring an emailer in now. We've got emails about this.
We've got an email from someone who wants to remain anonymous because they've had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, because what they've done is they've successfully sued the solicitor for failing to tell them that the house that they bought was leasehold. The solicitor settled before they went to court, and the settlement covered the cost of buying the freehold. And this person says that their normal household insurance covered their costs of hiring a lawyer to sue that solicitor.
OK, Matthew Jones, I shall leave it there, but only because we've got a lot of callers waiting now. And so far we've been talking only about new houses, mainly starter homes that were sold leasehold. But flats have always been sold that way, and the leases on some newer developments, they too are now throwing up big problems for the people who bought them. Hannah's in Oxfordshire. Hannah, what's your situation?
Well, hello, my situation is that I bought a flat in 2001 that is now completely unsellable, unsellable at market value, I should say, due to the escalating service charges that we have to pay on a 6 monthly basis.
Give us an idea then what you're paying.
Well, they're all different depending on the size of the property, but I pay around £5,000 a year. And these fees can increase if some maintenance work is carried out, then we're charged extra levies on top of that. The fees are unregulated, so you don't know from year to year what they're going to be. They give you a sort of an estimated figure.
Hannah,
at the end of the year, there's always an adjustment.
How did you come to buy something? I'm guessing you bought it with a mortgage that now people can't get a mortgage on. Is it partly because the mortgage rules have changed?
No, I think that probably somebody could get a mortgage on it, but as soon as somebody sees how much the fees cost on top of the mortgage payments that you would have to pay, they're only willing to pay way under market value. I'd have to drop the price. I've tried to sell a couple of times in the past 10 years, and I haven't had a single offer. But if I were to put the property on at, several, maybe 100,000 below market value, I might find a buyer. But it's because of the fees, and they take one look around the estate and they can't really see where the money's being spent. because our estate has been neglected terribly over the years, despite paying these fees.
Oh, Hannah, thanks so much for calling. Well, Louis Burns can tell us a bit more about freeholds generally and how they work. He's a property valuer and he's managing director of Leasehold Solutions. It's a company that helps people with leasehold problems. Louis, first of all, why does ground rent even exist in the first place? Hello, Louis, can you hear me? Louis Burns? Oh, I'm afraid we've lost his line. We'll go back to him as soon as we can. Let's take another caller. Barry Williamson is in London. And Barry, are you caught up in the leasehold scandal?
Yes, because the landlord has decided that he wants to reclad the building.
Oh, Barry, I'm sorry, your line is absolutely terrible. Where are you? Where are you? Could you move around and see if you can get us a better signal?
Right. Can you hear me now? I'm in the car.
Oh, no.
Any good?
No, I'm sorry. We'll try and get a better connection to you, Barry, but in the meantime, I'm going to go to Julian, who is in Surrey. Julian, are you caught up in this?
Yes, I am, because I've had a flat for 20 years, and the service charge started off here as £1,100 at that stage, but now it's over £4,000, and that's really affecting market values and the ability to sell here. One lady's been trying to sell for 2 years, who's getting older and needs to get the value of her flat. And the big scandal is there was a big change here in the basis of our service charge formula. I tried going to the so-called first-tier tribunal, as it now is, supposed to be no fees or no costs. And then the landlord found a new way to come back at me and suggest I had a contractual liability. They ran up £40,000 of legal costs, which they managed to land on me. So
on you personally, not on
yes.
the... Gosh.
No, gosh, because they argued, they set new law, my case and one other case, they basically argued that despite the fact this tribunal at the time said no cost could be awarded against you personally, that they argued that I had liability under my lease. So there needs to be mediation. All these disputes need to be formally mediated at a much more affordable cost, because the tribunals, they require you to present massive bundles. The hearing goes on for 2 days, or ours was 2 days, and then these lawyers all have a feeding frenzy. I think the lawyers on each side in any dispute love it, because they know that the sides get quite excited and want to win their cases.
But Julian...
and the landlords are kind of Goliath and can spend far more money.
But Julian, if you bought your flat in the 90s, then this has nothing to do with new style leaseholding. This is a problem with management companies that are free to charge what they will.
Yes, true. But although the people who are able to change things against me are actually other house owners, ironically, because we have a shared estate here with a developer built it in the 90s. So it's the other side of the coin. We have freehold house owners here who have more votes in the management company. So it's another scenario of any form of leasehold on either side. I think leasehold or freehold is dangerous. We were supposed to have had common hold. The Common Hold and Leasehold Reform Act 2002 said that we should all, any new flat should be common hold now, which is more like the European tenure system.
That's where you would, between you, own the land and you would run it yourselves.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, I nominally have a share of my management company, except that I'll have to ask our fellow house owners to extend my lease, who seem to want more money again. So. Julian,
thanks for calling in. I think Sam's had an email about this as well.
We've had an email from someone who's also been to a tribunal on 2 occasions for excessive service charge demands and claims for money not owed. Now, on both occasions, this person won the cases, but unfortunately, this seems to have aggravated the situation, and they say it leads to more spurious demands. They say that they're so stressed to the point of exhaustion about this situation. They'd like to sell, but they don't want to sell because they think that the freeholder then wins. This person says, I know it doesn't make any sense, but I'm afraid if I sold, I would feel worse about the situation.
Well, we can go to Louis Burns now, who I mentioned a moment ago, but the line went down. He is a property valuer. He's managing director of Leasehold Solutions. It's a company that tries to help people with leasehold problems. Louis, first of all, how does ground rent even exist in the first place?
Well, it's something that existed for hundreds of years, and it is designed to be pure profit for freeholders. So ground rent is literally hundreds of years old.
Why is it the way that flats have always been sold?
Because it is the system that we have in this country. It is a feudal system, in fact, that you can trace right back to 1066.
Well, a lot of listeners will have old houses, won't they, Louis, that have these historic leases on them where the rent was fixed maybe 100 years ago. It can't rise, and usually so small no one even bothers to collect it. A lot of people have flats where the ground rents are fixed and they're not a problem. But there are these leasehold contracts, and particularly that developers began to use 20 years or so ago for houses and flats. They're a bit different, aren't they?
Not really. I mean, the situation you describe is not really the reality. Although the new leasehold house scandal is the thing that's got this in the press, in fact, leasehold issues have existed. Onerous ground rents have existed. The first time it was debated in Parliament was 1884, and there was a whole litany of abuses that freeholders were inflicting on leaseholders. We tend to think whenever it flares back up into the news that this is a new thing and the old leasehold didn't have issues. But in fact, it's not true. Most leases have ground rents with accelerators that make the ground rent rise. And as some of your callers have said, there's also onerous service charges. There's onerous licenses and permission fees that leaseholders have to pay.
And the tribunal of limited help because you can be asked to pay the other side's costs.
Well, it's one of those things that everyone says, well, don't worry, if you're unhappy with this, you have a legal right to take your freeholder to the first tier tribunal. However, it's a kind of disingenuous legal right because, as one of your callers just said, it's like a David and Goliath battle. You have multimillionaires on one side whose fees are tax deductible and are very keen to set a precedent for their whole portfolio that they own. And then you've got a leaseholder who has to pay their legal fees from their life savings that they've paid tax on. And so it's a really unjust system, and it really favours freeholders.
And Louis Burns, thank you so much for that. Let's take another call. We've got Pat in the West Country. Pat, are you caught up in the leasehold scandal?
Yes, I certainly am, but only in relation to service charges on developments that are relatively new, so they're purpose-built. Although my leases are relatively good, the abuse of leaseholder service charge money, I have learned in the last 9 years, is the opportunity to have money misused is absolutely enormous.
So what's happened in your block?
Well, we've had in this one particular, I'll talk about one block, not the two. We have had 5 tribunal determinations which gave significant amount of credits to the leaseholders. So the freeholder had to issue it. They didn't pay us the money. They issued us credit notes which we could offset against the subsequent years until the credits were exhausted. The downside of that is there is no mechanism to force the freeholder to replace the money into the leaseholder's service charge account to cover those credit notes. So all they do is run the next few years on a reduced income, neglecting the building. When it deteriorates because of lack of preventative maintenance, then in the subsequent years they have to do all the rectifications which they then charge us for.
So you've won nothing?
Absolutely nothing.
Pat, thanks so much for coming on and telling us about that. Abe's Loon says on Twitter, the builder who built our block didn't charge anyone ground rent for 6 years until they finished the development and left. They then sold the freeholds onto an infamous company, and suddenly we were all charged backdated ground rent amounting to thousands and thousands of pounds per home. Well, the government's been promising for a while now to try to sort all this out, and over the past 2 years there have been a lot of consultations and inquiries looking at how the law might be changed to help people stuck with bad deal leases. But so far the law hasn't changed. There is huge cross-party support, though, for some kind of new legal remedy, and Sir Peter Bottomley co-chairs a special group of MPs from all parties who want to help. The all-party parliamentary group on Leasehold now has over 160 MPs as their members. So, Peter, do most of these MPs have constituents then caught up in this? Your committee has called it a scandal and a disgrace.
The answer is yes. The doubling ground rents for houses was confined to a small number of constituencies, but growing fast. The problems of flats and leasehold enfranchisement or extension of leases affects virtually everybody. And members of Parliament, of course, like other people, they may have a lease themselves. I've got one. I've had a good managing agent, a good freeholder. With my colleagues, we've now bought the freehold, no problem at all. I want to make sure other people have the same kind of experience.
Do you think this has just fallen through the cracks like a lot of other things the government would like to do because of all the time that has to be given over to Brexit?
No, I don't. The commissioners produced a report in 1885, a long time ago. George Thomas, the former speaker, in 1945, in his maiden speech, spoke about it. If you look at the debates in 1961, they were there. It fell quiet, partly because a number of housing ministers of both parties couldn't understand the problem, and the civil service split the responsibility from Commonhold with Ministry of Justice and Leasehold with Department of Housing. Neither had the resources, and it wasn't until we picked up with Katie's campaign, National Leaseholders, with Sebastian O'Kelly and Martin Boyd of the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, with the great help of Bob Bessel, former Director of Social Services at Warwick, who's developed 1,600 retirement properties, but not a single ground rent, because ground rent pays for nothing. That we've begun to get the critical mass. We're going to become the overwhelming minority, but we've got to keep pushing.
Now, there has been a promise recently by developers to peg the ground rents to inflation, and you have called that something that makes things less bad, but not better. What do we need to make things better then?
I think we need to learn from Scotland. Scotland's had 3 bits of legislation. One abolished feudal tenure, one converted the cost of ground rents to something manageable, and has dealt with the extension problem. And all the models are there, whether in parts of Australia or in Scotland or in most of continental Europe. And the intentions, as one of your callers mentioned in the 2002 Commonhold Act, were right, but it didn't work. And every part of the government system, every part of the lawyer system, and all of us in Parliament need to say to the developers, stop being selfish, stop exploiting others, accept a reasonable deal to get out of your feudal position, and let people be free.
Sir Peter Bottomley, thank you very much for coming on. Well, let's end with a caller who's managed to resolve the problem. Kate is in London. Kate, tell us your story then, briefly if you would. We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Hi, yeah,
Hello.
I've now moved on. I extricated myself from a nightmare, leasehold nightmare. I had an errant landlord. Years of hell. My property was falling apart because of neglect. And just argued my case again and again and again, great tenacity, been borrowing lots of money for lawyers and surveyors, but I stuck with it. It did make me quite ill, but I got there in the end, and I just really, my heart bleeds for all these people, but stick with it and you'll get out.
So tell me tell me a bit more about the problems then. You bought, what was it, a flat?
I bought a flat, and the freeholder owned the freeholder lived downstairs, and he was hopeless. You know, if buildings insurance wouldn't be paid, and roof often needed maintenance. And being very naive, and it being my first property, we all chipped in, and then he just gave up on his property, left his property with 1.5 feet of water, we realised, which resulted in the rest of the building sort of starting to fall apart.
And did you sorry to interrupt, did you get together and buy the freehold then from him?
No, we were unable to because of all the machinations of the law, because there were only 2 leasehold properties in the building with his, that he'd let the lease go on his own property. So we weren't able to buy the freehold. And so I spent a fortune amassing information via solicitor to go to a tribunal, but found I couldn't afford to go to a tribunal. And listening to your programme, I'm glad I didn't, because it probably would have caused more problems. And then a property manager, they must have got scared a property manager turned up, because it was in a terrible, terrible state, and then started the battle with the property manager being charged for the negligence of the freeholder,
Kate,
etc.
I'll have to stop you, but well done anyway for finding a solution. Now, before we leave it, the Home Builders Federation told us that leasehold remains a secure form of home ownership, and to underline this and provide buyers as well as existing leaseholders with confidence, they say that 40 of the country's largest home builders have signed a promise to make homeowners fully aware of their rights and to provide additional protection against unfair practices. Thank you everyone who called us and wrote and listened. There'll be another phone in same time next week. Goodbye.
Call You and Yours was presented by Winifred Robinson and produced by Simon Hoban.